As we're talking about what's at stake for our movements, I have to say that what is on the ballot this year and coming up in 2024 is whether or not we are going to live in a fascist society. I have to be honest with y'all. What we're seeing right now is very, very scary. We're not just dealing with two political parties, right, that are on opposite sides of particular issues. We are dealing with an entire faction that wants to basically run this country by force, that wants to decide who belongs here and who doesn't, that is willing to use the military and police to enforce their agenda. They are also willing to use violence that exists outside of the military and outside of the police to enforce their agenda. And there right now are sitting lawmakers in Congress and in state legislatures across the nation who are aligned with that agenda. And so what is at stake in this upcoming midterm election is whether or not we are going to give that faction more power and fundamentally alter the landscape of what's possible here in this country. And I don't want to mince words about that. I think a lot of times when we talk about elections, we get caught up in the whole thing about Democrats and Republicans, and there are some core differences. That is true. And it's also normal to feel like they both kind of move the same agenda. I totally get that. But this year is actually unique. And this period is actually unique in that for the first time in a long time, there is a growing faction of extremists, right, that have a completely different vision for how this country can and should be run. And they are already starting to implement that. From Governor DeSantis and Governor Abbott out of Texas, Governor DeSantis out of Florida, and the governor out of Arizona, right? Those governors are doing things literally like kidnapping migrants and sending them to other states. Just yesterday, Governor Greg Abbott shipped a busload of migrants to the vice president's home in Washington, D.C. as a political statement. These are the kinds of things that are being tested in our communities by lawmakers and by leaders and elected officials. And they're trying to test to see if they can stay in office even when they are doing these egregious things. So really what I like to say to people is that no matter which side of the aisle you stand on, it is really important to stand on the side of history that says no to xenophobia, no to kidnapping, no to racism, right? We can solve problems together and have differences of opinion about how we solve those problems, but we cannot have differences of opinion on how we preserve and protect and uphold the dignity of humanity. And that is literally what is on the ballot. When you are casting your vote for governor or secretary of state or a potential U.S. congressperson, right? You are making a bold statement about what kind of country you want to live in, who you want to live here with, and how you want decisions to be made. Do you want decisions to be made by force and violence, or do you want decisions to be made through compromise? And so that is what's at stake for our movements. And it's also very much what's at stake for our communities. There are lots of things on the ballot in states across the country that are impacting us, whether it be access to affordable housing, access to affordable health care, whether or not we will accept immigrants in our communities, right? There are so many things that we get to make decisions on in this upcoming election cycle. And so there are the issues, right? And then there's the big issue, which is what's happening to our democracy. And so I really want to make clear that when you're casting your vote for governor, when you're casting your vote for secretary of state or a sitting congressperson, you are really actually voting for what kind of future you want. And so that is important to know. The message that I give for folks who are fed up with business as usual is me too. And I know electoral politics can be a frustrating landscape to operate on, but I do want to just give us some context in terms of uh, how we got to where we are. The reality is that our conditions didn't come out of nowhere. And actually, these governors that are in place that are doing egregious things in our communities, secretaries of state who are whittling away our constitutionally protected right to make decisions on our own behalf. This movement didn't come out of nowhere. It actually came from more than 30 years of this extremist faction voting. And they spent the better part of the last 3 decades putting people in place who shared their agenda. They were very strategic about what they chose to focus on. And when they lost or suffered a setback, they did not give up. They kept voting and kept organizing people to their side. And that's how we got to where we are today. They have been relentless in pursuit of their agenda. And I think we should be relentless in pursuit of ours. And so, yes, electoral politics is frustrating, it's exasperating, it's exhausting. And also, it is one tool that we have in a toolbox of many to bring about the world that we deserve and to ensure dignity and humanity for all of us. One vote does not equal change. And I want to be very clear about this, but also not voting doesn't equal change either. What's so interesting, right, is that sometimes people think that voting is kind of like a snack machine. So you go to the snack machine and you put your quarter in and you press B6, and all of a sudden you're supposed to get justice. And that's not how it works. Voting is a tool in a strategy for building power and getting organized and working hard together to move our agenda forward. And so, even though we're tired, we must be relentless in our pursuit of justice. And one way we do that is by continuing to vote, by continuing to make sure that no decision about us is going to be made without us, and continuing to make sure that there are consequences when people disappoint us. And if we sit back and we sit home, we cannot implement those consequences, and we cannot make decisions over our own lives. And here's the reality of it, folks. At the end of the day, our opposition wants us to stay home. In fact, they count on it. And that's why they rig the rules so that when we do show up at the polls, we can't cast our votes. This is why they spread misinformation and disinformation in our communities, because they don't want us to vote. They want us to stay home because they know how powerful we are when we're organized. So let's flex our power. It's ours for the taking. Last thing I will say here is voting is one tool, but is not the only tool. And frankly, it is important that we show up at the polls every 2 years to make sure that our voices are heard. But even more important than that is the work that we do in between election cycles to change the political landscape. It's important that we are waging our fights in between midterm elections and presidential elections, that we are organizing more and more people around an agenda that reflects the best of us, and that we are moving that agenda in state houses, in city councils, in school boards, and in the United States Congress. But it's even more important that we are building a movement out of that agenda. And so for me, when we vote, it is one step toward all that other work that we have to do to build long-term power that will change the landscape that we're operating in. That is why we do this work. It is not to elect Democrats or Republicans. It is to win hearts and minds, and it is to make the rules and change the rules. We do this work because we want to decide where money goes and where it doesn't go. And we do this work because we want to define the story of who this country is, and more importantly, who it can be. And so again, I want to thank you for inviting me. Thank you for all of the work that you're doing. Seed the Vote, folks. You are amazing. At the Black Futures Lab and the Black to the Future Action Fund, we work to make Black communities powerful in politics, and we are overjoyed to stand in solidarity with you all. Thank you for having me, and please help us get out the vote. There's a lot at stake, and our futures depend on it. Peace.